order the Pentucket Regional School Committee Special Business Meeting of March 12, 2020. Roll call, Wayne Adams.
Here.
Joanna Blanchard.
Here.
Bill Buell.
Here.
Emily Dwyer. Here. Marie Falzani.
Bill.
Dick Hodges. Lisa O'Connor here. Bruce Reddick.
Here.
Gina Trotter.
Here.
So we don't have to. So can I please have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? I'm sorry. Under new business, all these articles are going to be discussed at once, so I'm just going to list them all. We have the school district health advisory update response plan on COVID-19 trends in the district across the state regarding the same topic. Directives from the Department of Education, the CDC flow chart, academics, field trips, athletics, and preparation. And we are going to end the meeting with an executive session. It's not on.
There's one over there, though. One over there.
It's not on the agenda.
Public comment?
I'm sorry, public comment. Is there any public comment? Could you hear me? Public
I'm
comment?
just asking you to speak a little louder.
Any public comment? So, new business.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate all of you being able to get here this evening. The way this is written up on the agenda was written 2 days ago. And obviously, since then, quite a bit has changed. So I'm going to go over with you a whole bunch of information. I'm trying to categorize it. But as we go through a category, or as you have questions, just interrupt, ask questions, and I'll answer everything I can. And Mr. Conway and I have been working with just about everybody under the sun for quite some time over this. So we have most of the factual information that we know about, but there's still much more to come. So the first question is, who is it that we're talking to, who have we been working with? We started contacting our local health agents last week. On Friday, this past Friday, we had a conversation. We had a meeting with our local health agents from the Board of Health. We also had that meeting, the purpose of it was to make sure everyone was on the same page with kind of what we would do if there was a situation where we had a concern, that we would call and get directions from our local health agencies. So we established that in that meeting. That was important. Then following that meeting, we had a conference call with the commissioner of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, where they gave some additional information. But there's a lot of lingering questions out there, things that we didn't learn, and I felt like he's out there listening to us consistently about what's going on, and a lot of the questions we have, and they have to, when we consider the entire state, they have a lot of pieces they need to make sure they legally dot their I's, cross their T's. So that's where things had kind of started in the last week. But even as late as today, I was talking with our physician for the district. I was over, we had a building meeting at Dora Whittier. We had a situation came up, and I was just able to walk over and have a quick meeting with him, just about what we're doing here, making sure we're not violating any procedures and protocols that are set forth. We know what the CDC has said, we know what the DPH has said. So we pretty much try to keep everybody in the loop as much as we can. There's no question people want specific answers. They want specific answers to specific scenarios. And some of that we can't provide yet. And we'll get to some of those. But when questions do come up, when certain situations do arise, it's us sitting down, figuring it out, and then us going out to those folks who are the medical experts. That's not what we are. We're educators. So we go to the medical professionals and find out what it is that they think is best. I know this afternoon we had a meeting with all the administrators in the district. We had Brady Lozier was on there. She's the lead nurse for the district. And just walk through some of the things that they'll encounter in the schools. If the child is sick, if an adult is sick, what is that process? So We just wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page with what's happening. So, another big question that comes up is, how is this school year going to work? What does this look like if there's massive cancellations? We just heard Everett, 6 weeks is closed. And does that mean they have to walk all the way or keep on working with school all the way to July and August? And the answer is no. I think most of us know we don't go past June 30th as a date. Last week, with the conversation with the commissioner, they had said that the redefined everything, make sure everybody understood that April 1st is kind of a critical day. So everything up through April 1st, if you miss 15 days, you need to make up 15 days. After April 1st, if you didn't use any snow days, or you only used 3 snow days, and you missed 7 days after April 1st, you only go to that 185th day. You don't go beyond. So in the instance of Everett, they are not going to go beyond the 185th school day. The reason being is that just the start of this week, they shifted it to make it March 15th, which is going to be this Sunday. So this Sunday, any days that are missed, we do not have to go to school past what will become for us June 24th. So if we end up missing 3 weeks of school, June 24th. We miss only 3 days of school, it's June 24th. We miss 2 days of school, it's June 23rd. But June 24th is now kind of that is the latest date that we will end up going to this school year. Does anybody have questions about the last day of school? All right. Field trips, yes, go ahead.
So are they going to want April school vacation? Like say we're in school, would we definitely cancel that if we, take 2 weeks off now?
Yeah. So this is a conversation we had as we were walking over, or right before we started coming over here. We said we could see a situation where tomorrow morning, the direction is, we want you to go, and if you we're going to go out for 2 weeks, and then you're going to come back and work April vacation. We could see that.
Mm-hmm.
Our initial thought earlier this week was trying to get us to that April vacation, say, hey, we want you to be gone the first 2 weeks of April, and that April vacation to be gone for those 3 weeks. And it just, I'd say almost not surprisingly, we're not getting there. So I think we'll know more about that tomorrow, but it is a curiosity.
We're not getting it, we'll have to check sooner.
So it seems like, I don't know about us, but I know a lot of those, you have Everett for 6 weeks, Maryland's completely down, Ohio completely down, right. There's a lot of schools for tomorrow have had professional days, so they just decided not to have school tomorrow. Some didn't have positive tests, so they did close, and we'll talk about our protocol and how we work with that. Amesbury High School, they closed just a high school tomorrow because they have someone who might be. Now, also, I want to just clarify as well. And Ms. Brady-Lozier, I see you over there. I know Paul's a big lead. Oh, that's 2 members of Westminster Health people. Westminster Health, they're way in the back there. But I think it's really important to understand that when we talk about testing for this, and our district physician was very clear on this. Like even if we walked in there, they can't test you at the doctor's office. It has to be, you have to exhibit the symptoms. You have to have some type of connection because they have a finite amount of tests. And then DPH or the CDC will say, yep, go ahead and test that individual. So right now, the issue with the virus is, one, you can't test everybody for it. And the directions kind of that the physicians are giving is, if you are not having hard difficulty with respiration, if you're able to breathe fine, then just stay at home. If you're having difficulty breathing, then you need to come in. And as I think you've all read, the concerns are not necessarily about the health of the children. The children would act more as vectors for the virus. We're spreading it all over. And when you act as a vector, you spread that more likely to your grandparents and people who their immune system is compromised, or asthmatics, people with chronic respiratory issues like COPD. So that's the real concern. It's not so much the younger population as it is the older population. So, no, it's just a very interesting thing with the testing. And again, it's important to note that That test wasn't developed until December. We're only 3 months later, so they're still trying to get a lot more of those tests. Any more questions about the school days or anything about that? So for the field trips, we know, or we should all know, we don't have to worry about international field trips. Those, but the directive already was from the governor and from the commissioner, you know, we are not doing international field trips. Out-of-state field trips, we're not doing out-of-state field trips. For our domestic trips at this time, what I have told the principals this afternoon is we are going to postpone all domestic field trips starting tomorrow. So we don't want anybody going anywhere starting tomorrow. Again, we're not as concerned about the health of our children, which we are concerned about. We think the greater risk, though, is if someone does have that virus, that wherever they're going, that may spread. So that's what's happening with the domestic field trips. The Washington, D.C. trip, which is that annual trip that's done by the 9th graders, now it's the 8th graders. Mr. Conway's been working on that quite a bit, and I know he's been working closely with Mr. Parent, who heads up that trip. So I'll let Mr. Conway talk a little bit about
that being a out-of-state field trip, obviously. Currently scheduled May 5th through, I think it's the 9th, for our kids here. If you were to view the governor's directive and the commissioner's directive to end out-of-state field trips, they give no time frame for that directive. Given that ours is later in May, it brings to question, does our field trip fall under that directive or not? And I would imagine tomorrow we may get more answers on that, to what degree will they restrict that to. But in the meantime, this has been a hot button issue among superintendents about using companies, for instance, who book these trips, and what will be the refund policy in the event that everyone cancels. So I've been working both with Mr. Parent and the company World Stride, who we sponsor, and Mr. Parent has been working with for years to do this. They've been very responsive in the conversation. The bottom line is we have 149 students who are intended to go on this field trip. 79 of them purchased what's called a full refund program or policy, and that costs about $120. For that $120 is essentially a trip insurance that you can cancel, or the event can be canceled up to 24 hours prior to departure date, and you get your full amount back less the amount of the actual insurance, the $120. Right? There are 70 students, though, that did not purchase that refund policy. And there are staged dates, staggered dates, where you can get various amounts back in your refund. My question to World Stride and what they're working with us on, if in the event that we cancel this, are the 45th day out is March 21st. At that point, if we canceled by that date or prior, or individuals canceled by that date, they would get 50% of their money back. That's a loss of $500 per family for something.
$1,000.
The trip is give or take about $1,000.
Yes.
Yep. So my work so far with World Stride is for two things: looking out for the welfare of our families and our kids, but also looking out for the financial well-being of our families and our kids. They do have some earlier dates that would suggest we could get 75% back. We are past that date. I'm asking if they would honor that, given our prior history with them. Recognizing that they are a company and that they do have some expenses, even if the trip never occurs, that they do incur some expenses. So we're working on that. They would like to see if we can postpone it, maybe do it in June, can we kick it out to a later date? I think a lot of those things are on the table. The bottom line is, I think the existing contract that we signed, I'm asking them to reconsider the terms of that based on the exigent circumstances that we face. And they have not said no, and they're definitely willing to look at all options. They wanted to know how tonight went, and I informed them that we have a conference call with the commissioner tomorrow, which would dictate things as well. So we hope to have a decision by tomorrow about that field trip and which direction we will head. If we can extend that deadline of March 21st well beyond, in order to get maybe a 50 or 75% rebate or refund back to our students, we'll try to do that. And if they're not budging, we'll cancel, and then we can reconsider our ongoing business arrangement with them in the future if they're not willing to work with us in this circumstance. So, that's where I stand on it in the negotiations with them.
Is there a refund date after the 21st, like 25%?
There is
you get
not.
back?
Nope,
That's
it's
the last.
zero at that point. Yep.
Anybody have any questions about field trips?
March 21st.
All right, we're going to move on to a few different types of scenarios. So we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. We don't know what will happen in our community. But when we look at the scenarios, so protocol-wise, from our last Friday's meeting and pretty consistently across the state, it has been if there is someone who does test positive and they have a connection in that school, then that school at that point would do an early release or a single day, and there'd be an enhanced cleaning in that school building. In just that school. Across the state we've seen, it's not been an entire district, just that school building. And all the other schools, everyone goes, and then that school reopens the next day. Now we obviously, with the latest news coming out today in a lot of different areas, you know, we're trying to figure out what is a multi-day closing, multi-weeks, up to 2 weeks, what's that going to look like? What is it going to look like if we're out for more than 2 weeks? And that's really hard to wrap our heads around. I mean, we have all sorts of contingencies in place, but there's some fundamental questions. If we close, is the expectation that we are going to be delivering a virtual education to the children while we're closed? And so I spoke with Maureen Lynch, who's the superintendent of Whittier, and they are prepared to do that. They're fine with that. They're high school students. We can do that with a lot of our high school students. Our teachers can post stuff up. It's not the same. We don't have any teacher who has an online course. We have a teacher that supervises online, but we don't have any teachers who have their courses up online where kids can just go and take it. But we have teachers who know how to use technology to provide stuff up online. But we have to always consider there are demographics of children who there's no way they're going to be able to go on and receive a virtual education. And some of that is the nature of what the course is that's being taught. Some of it is the age of the child. Some of it is, some students have special needs requirements that they're not going to be able to get virtually. So those are a lot of questions that superintendents across the state have been posting and are curious about. And we hope that we'll get some of that direction tomorrow. Because it very well could be that it is, we get a thing saying, just when you're out, you're out. It's like 2 weeks of winter break. And that's what it's going to be. Flip side of it is could be provide children with a phone call or an email during the day and say, look, we'd like you to work on reading 3 books or reading 4 books and doing a report. And again, that's not something that we're trying to create. That's something that we are going to seek guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed on. And in the absence of that, if there's not, I can guarantee you, all the superintendents, Mary Ann can attest to this, I have more emails in my inbox just from other superintendents because they're constantly updating about what's happening in their district, and it's incredibly helpful. We're all talking about innovative ways, what can be done, how to approach it, and it just makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's very nice to know you're not sitting on an island by yourself, that you can pick up the phone and call someone, or you can see what other people's situations are and how they're handling it. And you can put out there, here's our situation. What have other people done or something? And you get a lot of answers. So there'll be some direction when we get there, and as soon as we do, we'll put that information out quickly. Anybody? Yes.
Have you talked to other superintendents about what they're doing for like their teachers, like people that are closing?
So people that, no, so like, I've not spoken with everyone that closed up until today. The people I've spoken with was just a 1 day for a cleaning, and that was it. We didn't have it, up to today, we didn't have anybody.
But as recently as the last 2 hours, there's been multiple announcements of
Correct.
closures.
So there was one school in one place that was not a traditional public school that did close
Multiple weeks.
for multiple weeks. But we didn't feel as though that was a good resource. Because there might have been some other issues.
But there are districts who announced today that will be closed for 2 weeks.
So we'll be getting a whole bunch of information about what they plan on doing. So again, it's easy. If you're Essex Tech or if you're Whittier Tech, all high schoolers, and you typically don't have those special demographics. However, you do have technical classes. However you want to teach some of those things virtually. They can do a lot of the book stuff, and it's hands-on stuff can be super challenging.
Our sense is, based on what we're hearing about the districts that are closed for 2 weeks, is that they're closed. It's not a virtual learning opportunity, it's nothing like that at all. I think Dr. Bartholomew is correct. A school like Essex or Whittier, it's just a high school, may have a different sort of opportunity and capacity to do something like that. But a K-12 district or pre-K-12 district has some real challenges in doing that in a meaningful way over an extended period of time. In short spurts, a day here, 2 days there, absolutely. But to do it over an extended period of time just does not seem like a really good solution.
And one of the things that I mentioned to teachers, I'm sorry, I know both of you. One of the things I had mentioned to teachers last night was I know like there's an urgency. They want to go out there. They want to be prepared to make sure the students are engaged. And that's absolutely excellent. I mean, that's what you want folks to be. What I've asked was just don't worry about that as much as we worry about the stress and anxiety that some of the students are going to be experiencing, because this is, for a lot of them, it's their first stressful life event, this first mini crisis that they will have gone through. As adults, we've been through them, so we know kind of how things go. Each one's unique, but just to be out there for the children is important. And if it does come down to, we are going to do online virtual, and I'm a teacher and I have no idea how to do that. I mean, it is not much for me to sit here, record a video with step-by-step, and this is what you need to do. This is how you get that out there. And there's also questions, and we'll get to these later, about if it closes for students, does that mean teachers are still coming into the building? Or is there, and if they might be able to come in and work in their classroom and send stuff out and then go back, or we talked about a packet pickup situation almost for some elementary kids. Again, there's a box. I love living outside the box, but not for these reasons, but it is a great exercise going through and trying to think of all those other ways it could be done. And that's something that we're going to face across the state, so I'm curious to see what other people come up with for options.
Are our students prepared for online learning if it comes to that? Does everyone have access to a Chromebook from pre-K up to whoever might need it?
Yeah,
Are
so-
they being told, like, so those schools that are in for 2 weeks, are they not going to school tomorrow? Did they go home prepared today to get that message, or?
So I suspect that's probably part of the reason why it's just 2 weeks off or 6 weeks. And it's not, we're going to do some digital learning because not all school districts have that technology, not all children have that technology. For us, we do not have technology for all children pre-K all the way through. We know, we talked about the Chromebook situation. Children in the middle school here, if they don't have their own, they're given one out of a cart that they have. The high schools bring your own device, so we think 7 and 12 are probably in good shape. 4, 5, and 6 is all in carts. So in order to distribute, it'd have to be something that's done quick, and it might have a pickup. You might have a register sign-up pickup, where if you don't have something, you stop by at this time and pick up. A device, of course, there's a whole sign-up thing, and we'll have to work through that with Mr. Buck. But, it's so incredibly impersonal, and I am biased on this, so please, I know people do online courses. It's so incredibly impersonal when you're trying to deliver a curriculum. Part of the importance of public education when you're face-to-face is there's a bond that occurs between the teacher and the student. And I would like to think that while going stuff and posting stuff on Google Classroom or Google Sites, well, that's nice. It's incredibly impersonal. I think that, I mentioned this, an individualized message to me from one of my teachers, like, oh my goodness. Justin just checking in, making sure things going all right. I know things might be challenging right now, but for me, just worry about X, Y, and Z. Or even a phone call or something like that. I mean, all that could go a real long way. And we talked about if the students do have their Chromebooks, some teachers might be able to hop on and for like an hour or something, or however long, and record something, or just do a live broadcast where everybody hops on and looks. But again, teachers may do that anyway, even if it's not a required workday, just to check in with students. So it'll be curious. Ben, do you have any thoughts on what you'd like to see? I'm curious to know.
I feel like there should be a capacity where, I mean, today's day and age where it's like a group call for all the students to join into. I know we talked about in our AP government class today where maybe in some capacity where the teacher would hop on like a conference call online.
Anything to do like a WebEx or something like that where everybody's on there?
That was definitely discussed today.
Yeah, I had it earlier. So could we ask, I think, the teachers even like right now, so say we're still gonna be in school tomorrow, just to provide students with the syllabus, you know, for what the expectations are, I mean, at least at the high school level for the learning for the rest of the year and the content, because the problem with some of our classes is we don't even necessarily have textbooks. So like, at least if they can have the materials at home, so if we end up in an emergency situation where we're shut down for 2 or 3 weeks, they have the materials at home. Because I'm just worried about some of our students not even having any access to learning materials. If it's, you know, like if it's provided as handouts. And even if we can't deliver online instruction, say it's just going to be for 2 weeks that we're shut down, at least the students would understand this is what we're hoping you'll be able to learn. This, you know, this week this is what we're covering, this week this is what we're covering. And I'm thinking more about classes like that Ben's involved in where presumably, hopefully, we still have the AP exams happening and, you know, those, I don't know if they'll be moved, but those are at the beginning of May. So we're kind of at a critical time for those students who have invested a ton of time into their work. And I'd like to think maybe they have a shot at still taking their exam.
Sure. I think a lot of classes in high school, maybe classes, they have set curriculum. All classes, sure, there's a standard course of study for sure. But we could absolutely put that out there. I think I go back to for the high school, middle school, that may be probable, and then we run into the issue of elementary, where it's not so much. That was the interesting conversation with the commissioner last Friday, when the topic of, when they keep on using blizzard bags as the example. Again, not our model. Our model is much better than blizzard bags. But that concept was initially, no, we're not going to do blizzard bags. And by the end of the conversation, it was, you know, we may start to look into it because there was a clear, overwhelming majority of superintendents on that call that just said, listen, in the absence of that, what would you like us to do? If we don't have the opportunity to provide that type of material to our early elementary students, there's not many options that are out there, or that we know about yet. So, again, I think tomorrow's going to hold a lot of that, but we definitely can. We have a PD piece we can communicate that.
So the other, I obviously have been thinking a lot about this for the younger set professionally, so I totally agree with a lot of what you're saying, but also my concern around making something like Chromebooks available, that's great if you have internet access to them. But I know that I certainly have students who don't, and in fact I think there are definitely some teachers who don't as well. So I was wondering if anything had been offered up by, I know that, you know, companies like Verizon, like they have some technology that, you know, people can.
Hotspots or something.
Yeah, I mean, like that. So, because some of this work obviously could be done on a phone, but most of it, you know, really can't. So I don't expect you to have an answer, but it is something I'd like us to like just be thinking about, or potentially that through the state we could be asking for.
It's actually had a good conversation with Mr. Went the other day. He was talking about how they were able to get one child that they knew about that did not have access, now has access, because it was a kind of a Christmas thing that the company had done. So access from someone who doesn't have it.
I mean, it's great if you can come pick up a Chromebook at your like allotted time so nobody gets near you, but it's another thing entirely if that doesn't help you at all because, you know, the library is closed or whatever and you can't go to the place you normally do to get on there. And I think that is something you need to consider.
How is it, MCAS, has it
You were going ahead of my agenda, so I'm
Okay.
going to have to ask you. But I will address that right now. So, I don't know. I don't know. If you look at a school, so just,
Do we have to take them?
so, I'm curious.
We will probably find out that answer tomorrow morning.
So if you consider Everett, which is not a small school district, is out for 6 weeks, forget even, do we have to take, what are those scores going to look like, even if they do have to take it? Like, what's the validity of those scores? Are we now at the point where we're going through and doing it because it's just what we have said we have to do, we have to test? I think that's an interesting, and there's federal implications there as well, but I think that's an interesting question for the commissioner and for the federal government of, are you going to force testing like this, where it may not make a tremendous amount of sense to do so? The AP testing, I mean, that's a great point, that's May. So those children in Everett, they'll have 1 week of review before the first exam. That's going to be a challenge. I would guess and hope that everyone takes a step back and says, okay, education, the way we're doing it right now, and here's kind of our core things have been testing, and maybe that's not as critical as making sure the health pieces are taken care of. Maybe it'll be okay if we don't have a year where testing is done. That would be the hope. But I mean, you can imagine, you talk about anxiety and stress. If I'm a child and I'm gone for a period of time, and then I come back and I'm have a test, the teacher's going to be stressed, the children are going to be stressed, because they're all going to be taking an assessment. They've not had a full year of curriculum to demonstrate that they've mastered the concept they have been taught, do their best in what they have.
My assumption is we will hear about some relief to those expectations tomorrow. I would be surprised if we don't. Already, just based on schools doing what they're doing, it's impossible to have comparable data. Yep.
So I have a whole bunch of questions. The first one being, I guess, with so many school districts closing and kind of this domino effect, how do we as a district say, yes, we'll have school tomorrow, but then we might not next week? Like, to me, that's kind of like, well, we know it's going to be coming, but like, half day tomorrow is still the same population getting together under the same circumstances. So I guess, leaving here tonight, like, are we making a decision? Are we giving you guys the ability to make the decision? You don't even need that. Like, I don't know.
So, yeah, we are taking our cues from the Department of Public Health. If they say that you need to shut down, then we need to shut down. If they say, in Essex County, is there one confirmed case
Yes.
maybe?
Yeah,
There's
it's-
one, or
it's
there's one
yesterday,
possible.
unless it changed today.
A new one today.
So there are 2 in Essex County.
There are 2 in Essex County. So I think it's like, that's why I think DPH has said you need to work with your local boards, because in your communities, there may not be a significant issue, there may be a significant issue. But we all understand the concept, if we have people moving in and out, in and out, in and out, that the likelihood for bringing the virus in is increased. And again, it's not something that was concerned about for children as much as it is for the adults. But I think that decision is something that the Department of Public Health now, I suppose, if you all directed us to close down the schools, we could do that. That is not the directive so far from the Department of Public Health or the Commissioner or the local boards.
I can speak to what she's saying, so I understand what you're saying, like, why is tomorrow okay to be here, but Monday not? And I think it's because they're really being very proactive. The risk is so small, but they're thinking the risk will build over next week, so that's the approach. What they're thinking, their calculations, their everything they're looking at. Tomorrow, they're looking like it's still okay, but it looks like maybe next week it's going to start to not be, or maybe the next week that. So I think that's why tomorrow's okay, but maybe Monday might not.
And I think I get that, but I just feel that there's people in the communities who are going to say, well, why risk tomorrow health-wise?
Yeah, so on that whole piece, you know, there's so many articles that we've read. There's one in the Atlantic talking about, when you look at Philadelphia and St. Louis. There was, I think that might have been the Washington Post as well. There was one that talked about to cancel or not to cancel. And it's the science behind it, of if you go ahead and cancel, yes, you're keeping the children out of school, and there's pros and cons to that, not just for health purposes, but not just for education, but for health purposes as well. Because when if you do cancel, if you don't cancel, they're in school together and they're in a classroom, but they're contained within a specific area. If you do cancel, they're no longer in that specific area, and there is the thought that they would quarantine and not go out and hang out with their friends. Not likely. Town Forest will be very popular. Action Cove will be very popular. The weather was warm the other day, and as you went down Bachelor Street, there were lots of little children out there. So the thought that that would not take place is a little bit ignorant, but it is, I think, a point where it's, you can't direct adults with children, say, this is what you have to do. Certainly the school can't do that. And in those instances, if you're with your children, they're locked up, you're going to let them go out and play. And it's kind of the same situation, but less contained.
After Chris or the end manager.
Okay, so I still have a few points. I know that NIAA has pushed out spring sports from starting. I guess if we are closed for educational purposes, are fields or,
We'll get to that.
okay.
So,
Well, since I'm on mine,
No, you
so
don't have-
I
no,
should have given us a better one.
Well, we couldn't, because we would have had to do an amendment and put like 25 other things on it.
And I guess the other point would be, so there's one, like, certainly traditional classes, but then a lot of the services that students get, if they're out of school for 2 weeks, then kids are getting OT, PT, speech, counseling, which is probably the most required thing for kids who are at risk and need counseling, for them to be away from school. So how do we envision still perhaps being able to provide services like that if we get to that point?
Yeah, so we've obviously had conversations with that. Dr. Jarvis has been looking at that pretty, in quite extensive depth, but none of those situations have anybody showing up at someone else's house to have face-to-face counseling, because that's just, that completely defeats the purpose of what we were doing. So there is, can you do it? And it varies from individual to individual. Some individuals are okay to go on here, and you can have that face-to-face. Some individuals could take a phone call, could be I wouldn't do a conference call, but it could be something where a parent, puts it on speakerphone and they have a conversation back and forth. It could be a situation where a parent has a camera set up because we have nonverbal children, and the person on the other side is directing them what to do. So each situation there is incredibly unique. And again, I think that goes to the complexity of the situation DESE has to take into account. Across the state, how are all of our children going to be served? And like the School for the Blind closing for 30 days, how is that going to go? Right? That's a big challenge.
and this is something that we do expect some direction tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's unprecedented territory for the Department of Education, who is subject to federal guidelines around special education services and IEPs. And when services are missed due to snow days, in essence, they're made up during the makeup days in June. It all balances out. But if we're saying that there be numbers of days that are missed that are not made up after the 185th day, that's per the Department of Ed's direction that they've asked us to do. What they expect districts to do regarding special education services and the agreements based on those, that will have to come from the Department of Education. They will have to direct us on that. I would imagine all districts will take the same action in relation to that. And that may very well be a question we will ask the folks in Everett and a few of the other districts who are deciding to close for 6 weeks. How will you handle this? And they may be the guidance on that with the Department of Ed. My assumption is they did not make this choice without already having an idea of what they plan to do, right? And we will see. We also have our students who are placed in out-of-district placements or collaboratives where children come from multiple schools and environments and districts. And we're in communication with all of them. We saw today the Berkeley School for the Blind, where we don't have any students presently. They are closed for the next 30 days. I don't believe there's an intention to make up those missed days and services at the Berkeley School. So, and that brings on a whole nother sort of umbrella of questions and issues, and that as districts have singular issues that pop up, we are now expected to inform all related. So if we were to have a positive case, which we don't have any in district or in any of the
No
towns.
presumptive, not for a staff, not
Nothing.
for a student.
If we were, though, we would have to notify all of our collaboratives and districts and schools that are connected in some way, shape, or form to inform them, so they can make decisions. Lots to be determined that simply is not known, but things that we know are questions that need answers to. Not things that we're dismissing or not thinking about, just knowing we will need guidance and an answer to.
Krista, do you have any questions? Okay, so we have Emily, Joanna, and Deanna.
So I have a couple questions also. Food, and so we have a bunch of kids, I mean, not necessarily here in this room obviously, but like around our towns that their main source of food is they are when they're at school. And I'm wondering if we have a plan for that.
That's later on our list, but we can answer that now. That's
Yep.
okay, we'll answer that right now.
I'm patient.
That's fine.
No, I can address it. That's fine.
Exactly what you said, so we've had this conversation, and a lot of it hinges on what the federal government is willing to do and what they're not willing to do. You wanna-
Sure. We have had conversations with Chartwell's, who is our food service contractor, about what this potentially looks like. We have about a 13% free and reduced lunch percentage. That's approximately what it is. We serve presently about 150 free meals a day and about 70 reduced cost meals per day.
Reverse.
It's reversed, okay.
Way more reduced.
My apologies.
Okay.
I was going off information I was given. So, based on that, Massachusetts, as an entire state, has already requested a waiver from the federal government and their school lunch program to allow for alternative issuance of meals outside of school operating hours. It essentially, their waiver is requesting that all schools, regardless of your percentage, be allowed to do what high percentage schools can do in the summers and school vacations, where they're able to set up essentially like a pickup sort of scenario with a boxed meal and so forth. If Massachusetts is not granted that waiver, we are really not in a position to fulfill that. Yet we can work with our Neighbors Table, which is our regional food security network, who I have some connections with. They have already reached out to say we're at the ready if we're needed. So we have the ability to help support families that way. My sense is the federal government, at some point, will grant the waiver. I'm not quite sure what the delay is, but will grant the waiver and give schools the opportunity to do that. We as a district get our standard refunds back from the federal government for that, and we would work out a plan where we would do something, it would be limited, it would be daily, because you can't do multiple days and what you have to do daily. And it may not happen right away in the first week. Food orders would really have to be altered, so it might be a little bit of a delay, but we do have some initial sort of plans of what that might look like. We wouldn't expect it would be limited to only those who qualify for free and reduced lunch. But we would not expect it to be anywhere near what we do on a daily basis while school is in session. But we do have some preliminary plans for what that might be.
Are we sure our staff's going to do this?
We have some preliminary plans about what that would look like, working with Chartwell's and Chartwell's manager on how that would be able to make that operate. So nothing's set in stone, but we've got the wheels in motion. And Chartwell's in general would be doing this in likely multiple sites.
And the timeline of it is what the challenge is, right? If you know it's going to be 4 weeks, and Chartwell's can work that out, we can figure that out. But if it's a day-to-day or 1 week at a time,
It's hard to do.
So I guess I'm glad that you guys obviously obviously have thought about it, but I would also like to see us just problem solving if on, thinking outside the box, however you want to say it, about what we might do to bridge that gap in the interim, whether it's our neighbor's table or some other local food pantries or other, organizations that might be able to support or willing to support, because it's a.
Well, our numbers are small, they do exist.
Yep.
Yep.
I think one of the big things on that is during the situation, you have to, those food banks are going to be running shot. We had, this is accurate, that there were outside of BJ's, there were
50 people in line
And,
at 9
and
a.m.
a police detail as well.
police detail. So it's almost like a run on the grocery stores. So with that, we know that those food banks are probably going to go and drop down quickly. But the neighbor's table's been very good with, they worked with Merrimack for really a long time.
But Groveland and West Newbury are in the catchment area as well.
Right.
So, yep.
And I mean, Bagnell is doing their
So-
canned food drive for that right now.
Yeah.
So, I just
But I
want to
think
make
it's
sure
just,
that, like, if we can't wait for the federal government to, get their act together, essentially. I don't want our kids to be hungry when there are things that we could do to plan service. So if there aren't tests available, how is it, like we're saying, if there's a positive test, right? We don't have people in Essex County that have tested positive. But yet there are people who are doing voluntary quarantine because they've been in a place that has a known case that has exposure. So how do we, I guess, how do we know if people are testing positive if there aren't even enough tests out there? And what do we do for staff who have been in a place where there is a known case that has been
so that will lead us to this
considered
chart.
positive?
That will lead
Yeah,
us to this chart.
but I mean, I'm not talking, this
So
chart which starts with China, and
Yeah,
I'm
no,
talking
no,
about that. I
it's
mean,
okay. Yeah, so that actually tells you how quickly it evolved. But
Yeah.
now it would include all of Europe, China,
places in
South Korea, Iran.
Called level 3 countries. Yep.
So I think, I know, I'm going to speak, you guys can just check on me on this one if I have this correct. But essentially, the answer to that question is, if you have symptoms, if I've been self-quarantined and I demonstrate symptoms, so we know, so you might have that official, that health agent would go to the house, and if all of a sudden that person's displaying symptoms, then they might have that person tested. So that's how they get tested, and that's how you come with a positive test. But if the person's not displaying any symptoms, there would be no reason for them to be tested.
But if you, right, if you are my child's teacher and you self-quarantine, symptoms or not, tested or not, at what point do,
Yeah, so that,
I mean, again, I can read the flow chart.
right,
but
so that's
like,
where we go to the flow chart, and then, so let's just go. So, person was in a place, or with a person who had a positive test. This person is not tested positive. They were with the person
Right,
who
but they
was
were.
positive. This person self-quarantines.
Mhm.
So, anybody else who was with that person, because it's 2 away,
Yeah,
they are not required to you can't require self-quarantine. They're not asked to self-quarantine. They can continue their regular day as scheduled. And that's the way the CDC's that's their directive at this time, and that's how it's being handled.
And that may change.
Yeah.
and that includes, the kids, so if a parent, right, their kids can still,
Yeah, sure. So if you had a situation where there was a parent who was exposed.
Biogen conference.
Okay, sure. All right, good. So, because it's close enough, right?
Right.
So if you had a parent who was at the Biogen conference, so they were around someone who was positive, they're at home self-quarantine. Now, if that parent is positive, tests positive, which obviously those Biogen people were tested, then that child will be quarantined. But if the parent is negative, then the child who is not direct exposed is allowed to go because they have not had any direct exposure.
So while a parent might be self-quarantining, it does not mean all the family members need to self-quarantine as well. Until
Only-
that parent demonstrates symptoms, at which point the circle gets drawn a little more.
Can I speak to the quarantine piece?
Yes, please, here we go.
So I think it's.
Can you introduce
Yeah, you
yourself?
see,
I'm Diane Gardino, and I'm the
What's your name?
health We're on film. Anyway, so I've been looking at this a lot lately. And when you quarantine within a home, it isn't like you're quarantined. You're not having your kids, you're not sitting at the dinner table, you're in a room, you're quarantined, you're using your own bathroom, and all of that's accessible. You're really, true nature, quarantine. You're doing 6 feet from anybody else. If you're with somebody and you have to be close to them, you're wearing a mask if there's potential, that you might be sick. But the quarantine is for that person. And like we said, it's not for the whole house. People are coming and going to the grocery store and bringing in food and whatever, but you have to make sure that your family member is quarantined. So there isn't that exposure that you're getting, because it is a true threat. So that's the important piece.
And it is correct, would the health agent would go by each day to take vitals on that person, or do they self-report
So
those?
it depends,
Okay.
that depends. So if they're not symptomatic, no. So yourself, you're gonna self-monitor, right? So all of those people that are even thinking they might be are self-monitoring, not self-quarantining. And then you could be placed in quarantine. So self-quarantine, you're still self-monitoring. If you're placed in quarantine, there's somebody paying attention, whether it's a caregiver, whether it's a doctor's office, whether it's the Board of Health. And then there's a situation where they can't monitor themselves, whether it's an elderly patient that lives alone or someone who just can't do it. Then the Board of Health would be asked to oversee that, and we would go in and monitor them daily by taking temperature, make sure they have everything. We also, as well, discuss the whole food issue, what a quarantine means and what it looks like, and protective equipment, and what that means and what that looks like. So it's really important that if you have any questions and how something should be done, that you reach out to your Board of Health and you ask them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, appreciate it.
Thank you. So, and I also.
This is great to have people like this around.
So I also just wanted to say, I really appreciated the email that you sent out earlier. I found it to be very reassuring and not dramatic or histrionic or stressful, the way some of the other communications that people are sending are. So I think the same thing.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Are you considering just shutting down school right now to people not affiliated with the school? So students can come, teachers, staff can come, but this should probably stop happening in public space.
Yes.
Just because you don't have control over.
Yes, you're going to hear in a little bit all about that.
Okay.
Yes, that has been considered, and again, this is a conversation we've had with superintendents all over the place, just about best practices. You're gathering numbers that senior citizens should not be in group gatherings 25, more than 25. For some reason, they say 50 for everyone else, but they say schools on Apple, which is bizarre. I think schools still.
Yeah, no, I'm just concerned about anybody some
Yes,
adult
yeah,
coming to
we're
our
getting-
school.
We're there.
Okay.
It's, after the flow chart, it's a few of these.
Okay.
Access to building by outside groups.
Excellent.
So,
I'm sorry.
That's it.
Okay. So are we waiting on the DPH recommendations?
So tomorrow?
Yeah.
Tomorrow
By
morning.
the commissioners?
I think so it's a combined thing with the commissioner and the DPH tomorrow morning. But if the local board, so far the DPH will defer to the local boards and they'll say, well, so if the local boards call us and look, we have a situation here, then we don't have to wait for them on anything.
Okay.
Thus far, it has been left to local decision and local agencies. We've been circled back, Mass DPH, right back to local officials making local decisions. And even the decisions you see coming out tonight for school districts, Somerville, Medford, closing for 2 weeks, those are all local decisions. That may change. It may change tomorrow, it may change next week, it may not. But at some point it may change and it may not be a local decision anymore. It might be a state decision, or it might be Eastern Massachusetts. There may be a directive that changes that course. But thus far, in order for us to close as a district, there's really no information based on the district that would lead us down a path of why we would need to close at the moment.
Okay, and so if parents choose to not let their kids go, like if they,
That's
We're
all.
getting there, we're getting
No,
there.
presentation.
Yeah.
All right, and will you be sharing with the community about the commissioner's call?
Yeah, because I think the commissioner's call, well, it depends on what's in it. If it's impactful, if it's just.
We're very hopeful, but.
Yes, so we are hopeful, it depends on what's in it. If there's information that's going to impact all of us, then yeah, that's going to be an obvious thing that we would share. If it's, continue to work with the local boards, then I might tweet something out that says, appreciate the law commissioner's office, who said, keep working with the local boards. But anything significant we pump out to.
I think tomorrow we anticipate some form of communication from us as a district with some information.
Yeah.
But to what degree will be dictated tomorrow. I think you can tell what we'll be doing tomorrow.
So that conversation, it's going to be prepped up, and depending on how tomorrow morning's conversation goes, we'll tweak that and then we'll send it out.
I have a question about the CDC flow chart.
Sure.
I know you guys don't have an answer, but it's dated February 28th, and it seems like whenever the governor talks or the CDC talks, they're continuously updating information. I was wondering, has there been any word on when this, at some point, I'm sure this is going to be updated.
Well, you'd think so. This came off 2 days ago,
What are you looking at?
the flow chart,
Oh, yeah, 2 days ago.
2 days ago. This is from 2 days ago.
Even
So-
though it's February 28th?
Right.
on?
Yes.
It was distributed again, though, 2 days ago to say this is what you should follow.
Okay.
This is what was posted on the CDC website and printed off 2 days ago. So that's the update. But so I think we know if you just replace China and you replace that with those other places, South Korea, Iran, Europe, or China, and everything else fits. Okay, so now on to, there's some other things, the guidance that we've gotten from the CDC, and I think you've seen this as a trend. CDC is a huge organization, so it's not going to be ultra-specific, it's very general, and exactly what Mr. Conway said, it typically says, refer back to your local boards, go back to your local boards of health. So that's what we've been doing. We've seen the New Rochelle, the CDC guidelines, that's a lot more specific. There's a lot more detail that's in that plan, and they have a barrier in and out, you can go in and out, but it's a good way that they're trying to contain that space. So, the access to the outside groups. There's going to be a message that goes out. I contacted the 3 towns right before I came here. I apologize that I wasn't able to do it on a phone call. I have had not the time to do it through phone call, but as of tomorrow, we are restricting all after-school use to the buildings to only necessary only access. So all the groups who have reserved building for X, Y, and Z, that's all off the books now. Mr. Haddon, he's on break right now, but he has the ability, he goes in and locks the system, locks it all out. And the purpose for that is so that we have the ability to go and make sure we maintain the cleanliness and sanitation of those buildings. If we have everybody going around doing deep clean foggings, which is what's happening every single night right now, and then a group comes in, all of a sudden we've cross-contaminated, that's not what we're looking for. So as of tonight, that is, all access is restricted unless it's an essential.
Does that include volunteers in schools?
For after school?
No, for during school day?
Oh, no, I don't think we have.
We have not given any directive to that. If that's something that the will of the committee for us to consider, we certainly could go back and provide that as a directive to our principals.
I think the reason that could be important to consider is you just have to worry about, would somebody be so embarrassed about the fact that they have this, would they report it to you or not? Versus if you have a kid in the system, you kind of know they're sick.
Yeah, we could, that's certainly something we could do.
And we would communicate that to parents tomorrow in the messaging.
Get that.
Emily?
And along those lines, it's still a height of flu season. So a lot of these things may not look, people, I can see people looking and saying, oh, you know what, it's just the flu. Oh, my kid was sick last week, so it's just, because it is so communicable and,
We'll send it out. We can certainly restrict volunteers. There's some folks that are building aids that they.
We'll halt all volunteers and outside visitors to all schools until further notice.
So, next topic, the before and after school program. So this one's a little bit different. We talked about necessary, so we are going to continue the before and after school program. It goes until 5:30 in the afternoon, and it starts at 6:30 in the morning. 6:45, sorry, I think she gets it, 6, that's right. So I think, so the
They
reason.
don't let us in until 6:30.
Good. So the reason for that is that's a necessary piece, but it does not, we still have the ability to keep the buildings clean and get everything done that needs to happen, even with that program there. So that's how we're going to, if school closes, obviously that closes. If the schools are closed, we are not going to be running the before and after school program. We're not going to be providing a daycare. So that's kind of those pieces about that. Does anybody have any questions about the before and after school program?
The parents move into the building to go with that? Or can we do it like
You have to, I'm assuming, yeah.
So at the Bagnell, you pick up and drop off, it's technically the cafeteria, so you go in the vestibule, and you come right into the cafeteria. If we felt like we didn't want parents beyond that vestibule, like in the cafeteria, I can see that would be, I'm not gonna speak for them, but I don't think it would be an incredibly difficult change to put the sign-in book outside. The difficulty, I would say, is that those adults are also supervising the kids, so they need to be able to have that sight line. And same thing with pickup, you ring the bell at the door, they, you take 10 steps into the gym or the cafeteria, whichever standards get out.
We can review that process at each of the sites to see if there are capabilities of making it a little less intrusive, I
I
guess.
will say that at least at the Bagnell, they've been doing a great job of keeping, like they've been very vigilant about keeping the stuff clean, like I've seen them even cleaning the pens that were so, I mean, I know that they are paying attention to that. I can't speak to the other sites, but
The weather's gotten better now too, so when kids come outside to give their parents carrots, not exactly the height of winter that we had ahead.
Yep. We'll look at each of the sites, because each site may be different.
Oh, for sure,
Yep.
and again, I would say staffing is,
Yep.
like they have
It's a factor.
a ratio
Yep.
that they need to maintain.
So the next part on this agenda has to do with the attendance and absences. And students wanting to stay, parents wanting them to stay home for fear, students if they were self-quarantining. So I'm going to let Mr. Conway go into this because he's do a little bit of research, but we've got a great system in place that meets what the guidelines are.
So this is an area where we actually have received some guidance from the Department of Ed thus far, which is good. And we have a couple different scenarios. And if you bear with me, I'm going to go through the multiple scenarios and then I can take questions if there are. First, I'd say that we're going to be relaxing our attendance policy to not require a physician's note for any excused absences and only require a parent note to ensure that sick students stay home and don't come to school for fear of grade failure and so forth. We are still requesting if students are out that they call their child in the way that they normally would. And they may be, we're requesting that they give specific information as much as possible for purposes of monitoring symptoms and so forth. And Ann Brady-Lozier's here, our nurse leader, and our nurses want to know why the children are out of school every day. We need to know that. And nurses may call and follow up and ask more specific questions because we need to be able to monitor why students may be out. But we're going to relax it from the sense of you don't need a physician's note if you're out. A note from your parent is fine. We don't want to flood doctor's offices at this point. If the symptoms that the child is presenting with those suggest medical evaluation, such recommendation may occur by the school nurse to say, I think you need to bring your child to the doctor to be tested or screened. These days will still be marked as absences, but they will be marked as excused absences. We will permit our medically fragile population, so our students who have medically fragile conditions, to complete school through virtual learning modules. We will work with them and their families for them to be able to stay out of school and avoid additional risk of potential exposure. We're going to ask that those families contact their school principals first, and we will require medical documentation of such risk in order for this to happen, and we'll develop a plan for the time being of what that virtual learning may look like, whether it's 14 days, whether it's 3 weeks, whatever it may be. And those will not be considered absences. They will be considered, we have a code for it. It's VL in our code that will look like similar to a child attending a field trip. So we know they're physically not present, but it counts as a day of school because they'll be engaged in learning. If a student is self-quarantined, so if we have a student who is exposed to the virus and is engaged in self-quarantine, either, but not actually presenting with symptoms, just self-quarantine, they too will be able to complete virtual learning for the period of the 14 days. Okay? When a child is self-quarantining, it's not by individual choice, it's by following the directives of the CDC or our local Board of Health. As we've directed anyone with questions to go to the local Board of Health, and they're able to say, yes, under that condition, you should be self-quarantining for 14 days. We'll work with that child to say that those are not absences, and those children will be able to complete virtual learning to the best that we can. If it's a very young child, there's obviously limitations to what that might look like. But obviously, if that child is home for 14 days, they're home with a responsible adult at the same time. However, if we have families who are simply concerned about their children being exposed, and that child themselves do not necessarily have a medically fragile condition, and the parents would just simply like to keep their children home, those absences would be considered unexcused absences. If the parents wish to make that a more long-term arrangement, they can request a homeschool plan. We have updated the website with a fillable PDF for a homeschool plan, and we will expedite any requests for homeschool plans that fall into this category. We're hoping that really does not necessarily become the case, and that if that really ends up being it, we're at a point where we've been able to move on from closures of school, and we'll be in a better position at that point moving forward. And I think those are the scenarios that we might face.
So the homeschool plan would be the responsibility of the parent,
Correct.
not the school provider.
Correct. Yep. Because that would be a situation where a parent and family have chosen to do that versus guidance from federal or state officials or local officials saying you have to do this. So,
I
yep.
just want to make that.
Yep. Very much.
distinct.
Yep.
And long-term, what do you mean? Like, if the parent decides to do that, long-term, would they have to do it to the end of the year? Would they be required to?
No,
Or could they come back after
so-
a month?
And like anyone who's homeschooling, they can at any time re-enroll their child. But when you homeschool, you're unenrolling your child in public school is what you're doing.
Okay.
So, you're still a student of the regional school district, but you're not enrolled in the public school at that point, when you choose to homeschool. So, but those plans do need to be approved by us, and we will do our best to expedite the approval process of that. And we can do it electronically or over the phone. We don't need to, typically we meet, not necessary to meet.
So no more questions on that. We have a shift from Department of Ed. They make an adjustment
Right.
in how they calculate chronic absenteeism. And that was, chronic absenteeism was a big deal. It was one of the metrics they used to see how schools are improving and growing. Curriculum, and right now, they are not using any of that data. We still have to code the absences, but they're no longer going to use absenteeism as that metric for the remainder of the year. So that's, when we talk about MCAS testing, well, there's one of their major metrics that is no longer in play.
They will use absenteeism up to March 2nd, but not after March 2nd. They will not calculate it. And they will adjust last year's data based on the ratio of days
So they have a match.
to March 2nd as well. So they still intend to worry about accountability.
So there's, let me see, we're only halfway through. But you've already asked a lot of these questions, so it's not that. It's quite a bit there's a lot of logistical pieces. So questions we do not know or do not have the answers to. So if the school's closed, do the adults still go to work? We don't know. How does the payment work? How does it work for salary folks? How does it work for people who are hourly? Are we doing a virtual? If we're doing virtual, how does that work for early elementary? Are those demographics of children and teachers? And that's not a possibility. Bus contracts and transportation, what does that look like? And then if we talked about a child who decides I'm going to stay home, not because of local or any guidelines, but if an educator, an employee, if I decide I'm going to stay home just because I feel like I should, what does that look like? So those are things that are more common questions that we're trying to get more guidance on. That we talked about already, the lunch and breakfast for the free and reduced. Sports and extracurricular activities, just an update. I know Chris had mentioned this, but as of right now, the MIAA, which was supposed to start on Monday with sports, is postponed to March 30, I think it was March 30th. Yeah, so the end of the month. And for
the start of the season.
Start, so everything's delayed. And I think for them, it's a smart move, right? They get to see and evaluate how this progresses. And if they have to delay further, then they delay further. So we know that's the case with sports. We've already talked about the extracurricular activities, like the high school dance, for example. That's tomorrow. There's a bunch of other events. There's school plays. We had talked about and tossed around the idea of possibly, there's a play that's taking place next week, I think at Merrimack, I think at Bagnell has one coming up as well, and possibly letting the kids go and perform and live streaming that, or having parents only there, but it just seems like not a good idea. So all of those are going to be postponed, and we'll give it a week, 2 weeks, and then we'll reevaluate where things are. We hope the students don't forget their lines. I think they'll be excited that they can keep on, especially if we're gone and they come back. I think they'll be excited to get back into the flow of things. But that's kind of the focus of those extracurricular, all sports and extracurricular activities. Does anybody have any questions about those? I know we talked about that a little bit earlier. Yes, ma'am.
So if there were to be a basketball banquet next week, and there were like something like.
So there's a lot of districts have not had the banquets, especially because there's food involved and the contamination, like something like norovirus, we know is just renowned for someone prepares food, who's contaminated, gets in the food, and people consume it, and everyone ends up getting ill. So at this point, we are looking to postpone that all.
That's Robert.
Yeah.
And what about the tomorrow night's PAA?
So tomorrow night's PAA, we do not oversee the PAA. So if they decide that they're going to carry on, I would encourage them to, I guess we can reach out to them. They should really check with the Georgetown board, the local Board of Health, to find out. We suggested, I think hockey had a banquet at Maria's. Is that what it was? At Maria's. And we asked them to go check with the Haverhill Board of Health, because we believe that Haverhill is much more sensitive, very sensitive things with the dynamics of their population. In Georgetown, I'm not sure.
So if there was an event for next week that was school related, it could be brought off site if the place it was being brought off site to was okay with having that.
So if that
Like,
local,
so if,
the local Board of Health,
yes, but if the girls' basketball banquet is supposed to be next week, if we
school,
can't physically have it here, would it be allowed to
interesting question.
do what hockey's
So-
doing, which they really shouldn't be doing anyway, because having folks say, that's a different MIAA issue.
Yeah, so the school sponsors, basketball is a school sponsored event. So my guess would be cannot absolutely 100% not have it on site. I'd have to get back to you on that for certain. My gut tells me no.
But if hockey's having it,
Yeah, same thing.
Off-site.
Yeah.
But
When
we're
is
issuing
it?
this starting like tomorrow.
Where did it start?
and that's not,
It's tonight.
I think hockey
There's
Thursday night.
tonight.
Is it tonight? Is it tonight?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I'll find out. Any other questions? Okay. You want to do the collaboratives and out-of-district? We already talked about the collaboratives and out-of-district placement, so if we have a positive case, then we need to notify them. If they have a positive case, they need to notify us because children come back and forth in and out of the
Siblings.
siblings, I mean, so as a whole, I'm just gonna tell you, it is amazing, not an issue. 300+ school districts, and that is why my inbox is jam-packed, because it is a full exchange of information back and forth, and people have been excellent. The superintendents have been excellent in staying on top of this.
On top of managing their own districts, recognizing there's a collaborative force to stay in the loop with each other has been really powerful.
So similar to when you had snow day closings, have you been discussing this with the local area superintendents? So that
Yes.
all of a sudden we're not the little island that's attending school and everybody else isn't?
My last 612, or just after 612 was the last, so our North Shore group was the last message I got from Ipswich.
Which is where I think you see more districts closing for longer periods of time or started in the last 2 weeks in Middlesex County and in the western suburbs of Middlesex County because there were more cases. Whereas in Essex County, it just hasn't been quite the same, so that's why we haven't quite seen that same.
But I will say, what's interesting is,
But it's
so the North
starting
Shore,
right now.
all the North Shore folks, we can't figure, there's been no indication, and we're watching the Boston Metro schools all closing down. We keep on asking, is there something that they know that we don't know about? Because we haven't had any, and the reality is, if we look at the numbers, there's probably much larger numbers that are down there than what we have here. But I don't know if we're purposely left out of the loop, or if the commissioner tomorrow, if he leaks something to them and not to us. I can't imagine that would be the case, because if it was serious, he would tell us all.
It's fair to say, I think it's coming. It's just a matter of when.
So I just got an email about half an hour ago that Manchester Essex is closed tomorrow. And so then I go and look, and lo and behold, it looks like Beverly and Hamilton Wenham. So that, again, begs the same question, is there something,
Hamilton Wenham, so
at least,
Superintendent Hamilton Wenham was thinking about going from a full day to a half day.
so again, I am on the internet, I only know for sure that
Sure.
Manchester Essex, but then I go to, one of the places, WBZ, and it says closed tomorrow. Beverly, Boxford, Masco, Hamilton Wenham,
So I guess I don't want to be a little island.
No, so like I said, we've got it right here. We're just waiting. The only person we haven't heard from, we reported Georgetown. And the only folks that were waiting to hear from. Oh, no, sorry, we heard from Georgetown. Georgetown's on. The report's on that.
And Triton,
I've heard
but Masco's closing tomorrow.
Triton's on tomorrow.
Masco.
And if
So
that
again,
changes overnight, then it changes overnight.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we get information, and that is one of the pieces we also shared with the principals and all the administrators and Grady Lozier as well. We are in a situation where 1 hour before something, I can say, we're not doing this. And that is, and people can be angry about that, but that's the reality of the situation we're in. And I have no hard feelings about that.
And I think it's fair to say to families, particularly families of young children, they really should, starting tonight, think about their contingency plans for their households in the event of a single-day closure, a multi-day closure, what would a multi-week closure look like? And the intent of that type of closure is to limit social interactions, not to create a 5-week vacation. And that's a reality, and families will need to consider that. It's on our shoulders in discussing it and worrying about it. What does that mean for households? But in reality, this is what the state is facing. And we may very well, like I said, get more of a state directive rather than being left up to local decision in a short time, so.
So, other things that we've just sent out, this is more, maybe, so we did send out to counselors, we found this great, some of the, like I said, there's so much information shared, but there's great resources and links that we gave to our counselors, our behavior specialists, just how to talk to children about the coronavirus, talking to teen and tweens about the coronavirus, comic created from NPR based on interview with experts. So there's all these different links that we've got that we just put out there that are useful. And again, as we get information that's beneficial to parents, we try to hyperlink a lot. Sometimes that works well for folks, sometimes not so much. But we try to get the information out there, and it's very useful. I think, again, one of the things that is really important for everyone to understand is that we're inundated with all this information, and most of it's not positive information, even if we were heading in the positive direction. So it's just important not to have children walking around thinking that because I was in the Empire State Building, that I was in New York and definitively I have, but that's a logical conclusion they could reach just based on all the media. So I think these are great resources, and we absolutely, we're glad to get those out, and we'll share things with the community as we get them. Let's see, what other things? We have the information resources. Oh, so if we do close, we have a whole protocol we have to follow with contacting the local Board of Health, Department of Public Health, and then we have to contact the Associate Commissioner. I have to believe, it has been before, it's been very, very, very busy lately. But those are all the people that we need to reach out. We talked about the 180-day requirement, field trips and large events, and then what gets made up and what doesn't get made up. And that miraculously is the end of our 9 pages of notes.
I have a question. We had discussed medically fragile students and what the protocol is for them. We would get a note listing, the risk and everything, and they're not considered absent. But what about their siblings that are in the school?
So that would run similar to someone who was sort of quarantined and having a child who was not quarantined, that they would continue to go to school. If that parent seeks to keep their siblings home, or if they had an elderly parent in the house, then that's an option and a choice of the parents to do. At this point in time, that would require them to then submit to teach them at home, to a homeschool. And that's where the guidance is at this point. That's what multiple other districts have sort of put together as an approach to it. That may change. And the reality is, if there's that many kids who really need to be out of school, or if we have that many staff who really need to be out of school, we have a difficult time functioning and operating as a school. And we have to take that into consideration.
Do you need any directive or vote from us tonight on anything you're proposing?
Do not believe so. I very much welcome any, I think you've asked a lot of questions, which is really important. If you have any strong feelings one way or the other, we can certainly.
I'm thinking that there may be a time where there would need to be votes about some of these discussions, the pay, like if we're
Yep,
going to, things like that. So I'm wondering whether we should actually have a meeting scheduled for next week at some point, just on the docket. You can cancel at the last minute, just in case there needs to be.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things. So we actually, I know what the students were talking about, are we live streaming or not live streaming?
We had talked about live streaming so if school was closed, how school committee meetings would still be held, but we talked about live streaming those so the public could still view them, even though they couldn't come to the meeting.
Yeah, so I think even if we had something on the docket, and we certainly could get a lot of things. We could probably live screen, and we might be able to all Google Hangout or something like that, where we could hold the meeting virtually.
Facebook Live.
I don't know what that is, but
Facebook Live.
Facegram, I believe, is the. But so there's a lot of options we could have, but I think, yes, at some point, unless it's the directive is given by the state, it says this is what you are going to do, there'll be a lot of things we need to make decisions on. And I think, as those come up, Mary Ann will start making the list, and if they're time sensitive, then we'll put everybody together and as quickly as possible.
I guess one of the questions was, if we were to meet while school was closed, because we had to make some of those decisions, we want to maintain open access to the public, but you really don't want public to attend for obvious reasons. Live streaming a meeting would be a potential solution to ensure that there is open access.
Yeah, we also,
Yes, we do.
I mean, participation.
Well, remote participation, which is different than live.
You still have to have a quorum.
Yes.
yeah, so we do have the ability, certainly there's the technological know-how around the state of the, as long as everybody, we can teach everybody how to get on, and if it's Instagram Live, or, what do we say? Or Google Hangouts, or something like that, some mechanism like that, we could probably do, where you could see the people, you could hear the people, it meets all the kind of requirements, and it's not hard for me to record the screen. I don't know, I'd have to find out about live streaming my screen. I'm not sure how that works, but we can, is that something that is possible on Facebook Live thing?
Well, Facebook is you're just recording it and it's going out on Facebook, so anybody on
Everybody,
Facebook.
So I could be doing
So
that
you
right
could have
now.
like a PRSD, I think we do have a PRSD school committee Facebook account.
We do.
Anybody who follows it could watch the live.
oh, okay.
Facebook is blocked in the schools now, usually.
That's okay, we wouldn't be doing it from school. And-
Okay.
Yeah, if we were doing it, but yeah, we would have to, if we did, we'd have to have that exception. I don't know how he does it, we'd have to have a temporary exception to that filter. Does anybody have any more questions? Ben, any,
No final directive.
how do you feel about all this?
I think we're going down the right path. I mean, I see a lot of the area schools closing, so I think it's interesting to see what happens tomorrow morning with the phone call, and what's gonna happen, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that really is kind of the biggest, that was something that was supposed to happen today. I was supposed to be with the superintendent's day in Marlboro. Because of everything that's going on, they understood how many, people are making a lot of decisions every single minute. So they said, they asked us not to come down, not because of fear of the virus, but because they understand what we're, that's not, yeah, I trust Ross catches the flag. So this, it's been the whole days. But that was gonna be a big part of that meeting, was we were gonna go through, have the conversations, come up with our questions, and then the commissioner was gonna get on the phone. The fact that it was delayed, Mr. Conway and I were on last night, and I said, what the heck just happened? But that's like the last thing I wanted. I wanted to be able to come to the meeting tonight, having been in that meeting, so we could update. But I think it's a good indicator when you shift something like that, that they understand they need to make sure I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and everyone's on board, including the governor, the state legislatures, and just that we're doing.
The shift in time and the delay for them is an indication to us that there's some fairly significant answers and substance to what we provided to them. They need to get one shot.
Again, I really do appreciate everybody coming tonight. I apologize for the very short notice, especially everyone that's here. But it was one of those things, like you said, February 28th, here we are 13 days later, and how much that chart has changed in that first piece. And just on your agenda, what was at that time 2 days ago, or just over 2 days ago, what was the critical things and how much that has changed? And how many, just all the meetings and conversations that have taken place. Sort of, it's evolving quickly, and I think most of us, like we said, we know where this is heading. I think if we have the ability to contain our communities to the best of our ability, I think we'll end up on doing the right thing by our students and our parents. So, that's all I have.
Okay, so, we have a motion to enter into executive session. To discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigation position of the public body or the chair so declares. Roll call, Joanne?
Yeah, we need a motion.
No motion?
I have it.
Second?
Any discussion? Joanne?
Yes.
Deb?
Yes.
Jane? Dana?
Yes.
Chris? Yes. Emily?
Yes.
Corinne?
Yes.